Hello everyone, Soda here from Edu2 Plus 24, where we make learning English fun and easy for you. Now today we are going to learn about the simple present tense. The simple present tense is one of the most frequently used verb tenses in English. It can be a little bit difficult for some people, especially if you are a beginner. Now, my goal here for this lesson is to help you understand how and when to use the simple present tense. Now, we'll start by looking at when to use the simple present tense, and then we'll look at how to form it. After that, we'll look at some spelling rules for third person singular. At the end of this lesson, there will be a couple of activities and a quiz challenge to allow you to put your knowledge into practice. Now, if you're ready, let's get started. Let's begin by exploring when to use the simple present tense. Now, this tense is used in several different contexts. For example, we use the simple present tense to talk about facts or universal truth and generalizations. The simple present tense can also be used to describe routines, repeated actions, and habits. Now, it is also used with non continuous verbs, which is also known as stative verbs. We occasionally use the simple present tense to talk about the near future events or something that will happen in the near future. It can also be used to give instructions and directions. Are you feeling a bit confused? Don't worry. We'll break it down step by step with example so by the end of this lesson you'll have a clear understanding of when and how to use the simple present tense. Okay, now let's start with the first usage for the simple present tense. We use the simple present tense to talk about facts, truth, and generalizations. Now let's look at some examples here. I live in Seoul. Now, that's a fact. It is true. Everyone knows that I live in Seoul. Here's another example. The sky is blue. That's also a fact. It is true. It doesn't change. Everybody knows that the sky is blue. It was blue yesterday and it's blue today and it will be blue tomorrow. That makes it a fact. Here's another example. Pigs don't fly. Now that's also a fact because everybody knows that pigs don't fly. Here's another one. Dogs are better than cats. Now, some people may not agree with this statement. I'm just making a generalization that dogs are better than cats. It's not necessarily true that dogs are better than cats. It's just my opinions or my truth. Now, let's look at one more example. It's hot in the summer. Now, this really depends on where you live. But for some people, it is hot in the summer. So that makes it the truth for some people. So remember, we use the simple present tense to talk about facts, truth, or generalization. Now, let's move on to the next usage. We also use the simple present tense to talk about routines and habits or repeated actions. Now, these are things and actions that happen on a regular basis, something that happens regularly. Let's look at some examples here. I always eat dinner at 6 o'clock. You'll notice here that I use the adverb always because I'm talking about something that I do regularly or something that I do on a regular basis. Now, what do I do regularly? Well, I eat dinner at 6 o'clock. Eat dinner is what I do regularly. So I use the simple present tense. And here I use the verb eat. I eat. Okay, now let's look at another example. You go to school every day. Do you see the clue that helps you know that this is something that happens regularly? Right, it is every day. So it's something that happens as a routine or a habit. So you go to school. The verb here is go. You go. Here's another example. Frank starts work at 9 o'clock every morning. Again, this is something that happens regularly. Frank goes to work every morning at 9 o'clock. Now you'll notice here that I put an S at the end of the verb start. Can you figure out why I did that? Well, remember that when the subject of a sentence is he, she, or it, we need to add an S or ES to the end of the verb in the simple present tense. Frank is a he, so we add an S. Frank starts work at 9 o'clock every morning. Now let's look at one more example. They go to school on Monday. And again, on Monday means that they do it on a regular basis. What do? They go to school when? On Monday. So it is a routine. And that's why we use the simple present tense. They go to school. So remember, we use the simple present tense to talk about routines and habits that happen regularly. Okay, so now let's move on to the next usage. We also use the simple present tense with non-continuous verbs. These are verbs that we don't use in the continuous form, even if they are happening right now. These verbs are also called states or stative verbs. These are something that connected with our thoughts, our opinions, our feelings or emotions, and our five senses. Here, let me give you some examples. I love my job. Now, the verb here is love. That is an emotion. So I use the simple present tense. It smells good. Now, smell is one of the five senses. So I use the simple present tense. And you'll notice here that I also added an S to the verb smell. Because remember, the subject in this sentence is it. So I need to add an S. She feels tired. Here, we are talking about a feeling. Again, the subject here is she. So we need to add an S to the verb. Let's look at one more example. They need help. Now remember, we don't say they are needing help. Even though it's happening right now, need is a non-continuous verb or a stative verb. So we say they need help instead of saying they are needing help. So remember, we also use the simple present tense with non-continuous or stative verbs that are connected with our thoughts, our opinions, our feelings, emotions, and our five senses. So let's move on to the next usage. We occasionally use the simple present tense to talk about something that will happen in the near future. Now, this makes many English learners a bit confused, right? But remember that we are not using the future tense here. We are using the simple present tense. It is possible to do that, and it's actually very common for people to do that. Again, for something that will happen in the near future, we can use the simple present tense to talk about it. All right? So let me give you some examples here. I have English class at 2 p.m. So 2 p.m. means that it will happen soon. It's not 2 p.m. yet, but it will happen soon. So I can say, I have English class at 2 p.m., the simple present tense. Jenny arrives on Saturday. Again, Saturday means that it's in the near future. So we can use the simple present tense to say that Jenny arrives on Saturday. You'll also notice that I added an S at the end of the verb arrive because Jenny, the subject, is a she. So we need to add an S. We start our summer class soon. Again, soon means it's in the near future. So we can use the simple present tense. So we use the verb start. They come home tomorrow. And again, this is something that will happen in the near future. Tomorrow, it will happen tomorrow. They will come home tomorrow. So we use the verb come. So remember, it is possible and it is very common to use the simple present tense to talk about something that will happen in the near future. We can also use the simple present tense for instructions and directions. Now, instructions and directions are advice and information about how to do or use something, or how to get from one place to the next. Let's say you want to teach people how to cook something. So you could say something like this: boil the water, measure the flour, mix two eggs, add the eggs to the flour. Here, you'll notice that we don't necessarily need to have a complete sentence. You could just use the verb in its simple present form: boil, measure, mix, add. Similarly, you can also give directions for reaching a destination. For example, go to the nearest station, take the blue train, get off at Seoul Station, take the third exit. Again, we don't have to say you go to the nearest station, you take the blue train, you get off at Seoul Station, or you take the third exit. So remember, it's possible and very common to use the simple present tense to give instructions and directions on how to do something and how to go from one place to the next. There are three basic structures for the use of the simple present tense. One is used for the positive sentences, and the second structure is used for negatives. And the third structure is used for questions. Now, let's start by taking a closer look at the first structure. When we write a positive sentence, we add the subject followed by the main verb in its simple present conjugation. Now, let me give you some sentences in simple present with the main verb listen. I listen, you listen, he, she, it listens, we listen, they listen. Now, the only thing we need to remember is to add an S or ES depending on the verb for the third person singular. Now, let's look at the second structure. When we write a negative in present simple, we need to include the auxiliary verb or the helping verb do or does conjugated to match the subject. Here are some examples for negatives in present simple with the main verb listen. I do not listen. You do not listen. He, she, it does not listen. We do not listen. They do not listen. Now, unlike when we are writing positives, we always use the base form of our main verb. Now, let's move on to the third structure, forming questions. When forming a question, we place the do or does before the subject. For example, do I listen? Do you listen? Does he listen? Does she listen? Does it listen? Do we listen? Do they listen? Let me put everything in a chat just in case you are still a bit confused or unclear about how to form the present simple. Now remember, I said that there are three basic structures for the use of the simple present, right? Well, here they are again. The first column on the left is how we form the positive or affirmative statements. The second column is how we form the negative statements. And the third column is how to form the questions. Now let's start with the left column. To make a positive statement or a sentence, we need to add a subject. For example, I, you, we, they, he, she, and it, followed by the main verb, which is work, in its present simple tense. For example, I could say, I work in a school. You work in a school. We work in a school. They work in a school. He, she, it works in a school. Now, the only thing we need to remember here is to add an S or ES depending on the verb for the third person singular. Now, let's look at the negative structure. Here, all you need to remember is to include the auxiliary verb, also known as the helping verb do or does, conjugated to match the subject. So you could say, I do not work in a school. You do not work in a school. We do not work in a school. They do not work in a school. He, she, it does not work in a school. Now, let's move on to the third column, how to form the WH questions. When forming a questions with what, where, when, which, why, or how, we place the WH words before the helping verb do or does, followed by the subject and then the main verb in its simple present form. For example, I could say, what do you do? So as you can see here, the WH question word goes first, followed by the helping verb do, and then the subject you, followed by the main verb do in its simple present. So what do you do? For a positive answer, I could say I'm a teacher. And for a negative answer, I could say I am not a teacher. Now, let's look at the next question. What does she do? She is a student or she's not a student. Next question. Where does he live? He lives in Daegu or he does not live in Daegu. And for the last question, where do you go to school? I could say I go to SCH University or I do not go to SCH University. So that's how we form the positive, negative, and questions for the simple present. And try to remember that we add s or es to the verb when we answer about a third person subject, he, she, or it. We use the helping verb do or does plus not in questions and negative statements. And we usually use the contraction don't or doesn't. All right, let's look at some spelling rules for the third person singular, he, she, and it. Now, there are a few important rules I want you to remember. In the simple present tense, most regular verbs use the base form except in the third person singular, which ends in s. So we add s or es to the verb when we answer about the third person subject, he, she, or it. For example, he works, she works, it works. And here are some verbs that end in ch, sh, x, or ss. We need to add es to these verbs. For example, the verb teach ends with ch, so we need to add es to it. So it becomes teaches. He, she, it teaches. The verb wash ends with sh. Again, we need to add es to this verb. So washes, he washes, she washes, it washes. Now the verb fix ends with x. We add es to it. So you could say he fixes, she fixes, it fixes. Now the verb miss here ends with ss. Again, we need to add es to it. So this becomes misses. He misses, she misses, it misses. Now remember, some verb end in consonant y. In this case, we need to change the y to I, and then we add es. For example, the verb study ends in a y. Therefore, we need to change the y to an I, and then we add es to it. So it becomes studies. For example, he studies, she studies, it studies. The verb try also ends in a consonant y. Again, we need to change the y to I and then add es. So tries. He tries, she tries, it tries. Now, this verb right here have special form. Do becomes does. He, she, it does. And the verb go becomes goes. So he goes, she goes, it goes. Now, have becomes has. It's also a special verb. It has a special form. So it becomes has. He has, she has, it has. Now it's time for a few activities. Complete these positive sentences using the verbs provided in parentheses. You can pause the video while you work. Okay, let's check how you did. Number one, Tim goes to SCH University. Number two, my teacher likes his job. Number three, she sleeps with a fan on. Number four, I think an actor has an interesting job. Number five, a good student studies every evening. Okay, now try changing these positive sentences into negative sentences. You can pause the video while you work. Number one, John goes to school in Seoul. Number two, Bella works in an airport. Number three, Maria thinks her job is boring. Number four, they live near the airport. Number five, Lisa is a college student. Okay, let's check how you did. Number one, John doesn't go to school in Seoul. Number two, Bella doesn't work in an airport. Number three, Maria doesn't think her job is boring. Number four, they don't live near the airport. Number five, Lisa is a college student. Now, write a question to match each of these sentences. Number one, they don't go to school on Monday. Number two, her brother doesn't have a job. Number three, Minju doesn't live near our school. Number four, I am not alone. Number five, they don't like rock music. The first question would be, do they go to school on Monday? Now you can pause the video while you work. Okay, let's check how you did. Number two, does her brother have a job? Number three, does Minju live near our school? Number four, am I alone? Number five, do they like rock music? Now it's quiz time. Challenge yourself by completing these conversations. You can pause the video while you work. And don't forget to share your answers and tell us where you're watching this lesson from in the comments below. And if you found this grammar lesson helpful and that you've learned something from this lesson, please subscribe, like, and share this lesson with your friends. Keep practicing, stay motivated, and I'll see you in the next lesson.